We tend to think that we can't control our feelings control us.
When we experience happiness, it's hard to know what's happening in the brain. Happiness is a really complex emotion.
Is it even possible to become a happier person? I became interested in the study of happiness probably almost 20 years ago because I was interested in motivation, the kinds of goals that people pursued, and were they sort of the right goals or good goals or worthy goals for them to go after. And in answering that question, we were looking for sort of a criterion. Well, how do you tell if it's a good goal or not? And we assumed, well, it should make you happy.
I think that being happy helps you be happy. I try to just make the best of any situation, and we develop habits in everything that we do, and being happy is no different. Practicing being happy will make you happy.
One of the things I study is goal setting. And one of the amazing things about goals is you just say it out loud or write it down, and then you can forget about it because part of your mind has heard what you've said, and it will start to work on that goal. Coming from a cognitive psychology viewpoint, we rarely think of happiness because it's so complicated. We reduce it down into this idea of pleasure and the pleasure center of the brain. A lot of things get the pleasure center activated. I mean, doing drugs activates the pleasure center. Eating activates the pleasure center. It's a really cool experiment where they took rats and they actually put electrodes in their brain, and they ended up in this area, the nucleus accumbens, and the rats were allowed to press a lever. And every time they pressed the lever, the electrode would stimulate the nucleus accumbens.
This is a device which trains the animal to turn on the stimulus for himself. Here you notice the animal wandering toward the pedal. Now, I will electrify the grid. The animal must cross an area that gives a very painful shock to the feet in order to get to the pedal and stimulate the brain.
And a rat wanting brain stimulation would brave a shock stronger than even a starving rat would brave to get food.
This shows a rat is willing to pay a very high price in order to get to the pedal.
Human addicts will pay just as high a price for their rewards.
Turns out these rats loved pushing these levers. They would just push them and push them and push them to the point where they would not eat, not sleep. Eventually some of the rats got sick and died because all they did was press the lever.
The relationship between pleasure and happiness is a very interesting question. There's kind of a debate in psychology based around that question right now. The distinction between what's called hedonic well-being, which means you feel good, you have pleasure, and eudaimonic well-being, which means you're pursuing a virtuous life and you are realizing your potentials. This idea that there can be evil, happy people, which you see a lot, it's not actually true. I don't think there's any such thing as an evil, happy person. Happiness is pretty strongly genetically influenced. One way that we know this is through twin studies. You take identical twins with the same genes that were separated at birth. Maybe they were raised by different families in different countries. You measure their happiness, you correlate them, and they correlate 0.8, which is a very strong correlation. And they've never experienced the same things at all. So that tells you that genetics is a big part of it. Only 10% is what we call circumstances, like how much money you make, what state do you live in, what car do you drive, these sort of external factors. And this surprised researchers for a long time because they thought that income, for example, should have a much bigger effect on happiness than it actually does. Between genetics, which is internal and you can't control it, 50%, and activities, which is 40%, which you can control, it's all internal, but the question is how much do you control?
We tend to think that we can't control our feelings control us. That's wrong. We can control our feelings. It takes a little practice, it takes a little bit of skill to develop that. Same with our thoughts. We think that we don't have control over our thoughts. We may not have control over our thoughts, but we do control how we respond to our thoughts. So if you can learn how to do that, it changes the whole system.
We can consciously decide to be happy, but it's not as simple as just saying like, I'm gonna be happy and walking around with a smile on our face. People do that, but it's not a true happiness, it's a superficial happiness. I teach Qigong, which is an ancient Chinese practice for health and well-being. It's related to Tai Chi. And I also teach mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a 8-week meditation-based class, again, for stress management.
Another reason why it's not clear if it's even possible to become happier is what's called hedonic adaptation, which basically means anything good that happens, we get used to it, we start taking it for granted, we don't notice it anymore, and it fades in the background.
You can choose to feel appreciation or gratitude or compassion. You can choose to feel those at any time.
You get married, or you buy a new car, you make some change in your life, and that gives you a boost for a while. You can maintain that boost as long as you do two things. Number one, keep interacting with whatever that thing is. Take the car out for a drive, have great experiences, hiking, tasting food, cooking, whatever, with your wife. You have to keep getting positive daily experiences out of that thing that changed in your life. Second, you have to not start wanting more of whatever the positive change was. A person doing the good things, virtuous things, helping others, is also a person that's going to have a lot of positive mood and emotion in their life and a lot of enjoyable experiences.
So being able to shift yourself into a state where you do appreciate what you have, you're grateful for things, feel compassionate toward others, that changes your heart, it changes your hormones, it changes your brain, and leads ultimately to happiness.